Steven Seagal didn't walk into the restaurant like a celebrity. No bodyguards. No flashing cameras. No dramatic entrance. Just a father, holding his daughter's hand. She wore dark glasses that covered her fragile eyes. Her steps were careful. Measured. She couldn't see the golden lights above her or the polished marble floors beneath her feet. But she trusted the hand guiding her. They were seated near the window, though she would never know there was a view. Steven pulled out her chair gently. Before he could help her with the menu, a soft voice spoke from beside them. "Hi, sweetheart," the waitress said warmly. "Would you like me to tell you what's on the menu?" Steven looked up. The young black waitress had already knelt beside his daughter's chair, not for attention, not for praise, but so they were eye level. She began describing each dish carefully. Not just the names. The colors. The textures. The way the food was arranged on the plate. "There's grilled chicken," she explained softly, "with mashed potatoes that feel smooth like warm clouds, and green beans placed gently on the side." Steven watched his daughter smile. Not the polite smile she used when she felt different. A real one. When the food arrived, the waitress didn't rush away like the others. She quietly guided his daughter's hand to the edge of the plate. "Your potatoes are at 12 o'clock. Chicken at 6. I'll help you cut it." She spoke with patience, the kind that can't be trained. Across the room, other servers hurried. Glasses clinked. People laughed. But here time slowed down. Steven said nothing. He just observed. Because something about this moment felt bigger than dinner. Then he heard it. A whisper from another table. "Why bring a blind child somewhere like this?" His jaw tightened. The waitress heard it too. She didn't react. She simply smiled at his daughter and said, "You're doing amazing." And in that quiet second, Steven realized he wasn't just watching a waitress. He was witnessing character. Backhand index pointing right. What would you do if someone treated your child with that kind of dignity? Most people in that restaurant had no idea who the quiet man at the corner table really was. To them, he was just another middle-aged father in a simple dark jacket. No designer suit. No flashy watch. No security standing nearby. They didn't see the decades of fame. They didn't see the action star. They didn't see the global name. They only saw what was in front of them. And that was exactly how Steven Seagal preferred it. For years, he had lived in a world where doors opened before he touched them. Where people stood straighter when he entered a room. Where respect often arrived before he even spoke. But being respected because of power was very different from witnessing real character. That night wasn't about luxury. It wasn't about attention. It was about his daughter. She had lost her sight at a young age. Since then, every public outing had become a lesson, not for her but for him. He learned how strangers reacted. Who showed patience. Who showed discomfort. Who pretended not to notice. Some people were kind. Others were awkward. A few were cruel. He had seen it all. But what he was seeing now was different. The waitress, Monica, wasn't being dramatic. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. There was no exaggerated sympathy in her tone. No forced cheerfulness. Just calm guidance. When his daughter accidentally dropped her fork, Monica picked it up before it hit the floor. When she hesitated before taking a sip of water, Monica gently placed the glass in her hand and said, "It's right here." Not loud. Not patronizing. Just steady. Steven leaned back slightly, watching closely. He noticed the way she described the environment. "There's soft music playing," she told his daughter. "And the lights are warm, kind of golden." His daughter smiled. "Are there a lot of people?" she asked. "Yes," Monica said gently. "But don't worry. You're the calmest one in the room." Steven felt something shift inside him. Because she wasn't just helping his daughter eat. She was helping her feel normal. Across the restaurant, the manager paced near the counter, checking watches and whispering instructions. It was a busy night. Tables were full. Monica had already spent more time at their table than most servers would. But she didn't seem concerned about tips. Or speed. Or approval. She seemed focused on one thing. Making sure a little girl didn't feel invisible. Steven had built businesses before. Invested in projects. Worked with powerful people who spoke confidently about leadership. But here, in a crowded restaurant, leadership looked very different. It looked like kneeling beside someone who couldn't see. It looked like patience. It looked like dignity. He remembered something his daughter once told him. "Dad," she had said, "I don't mind not seeing. I just don't like when people act like I'm not there." And tonight, someone was making sure she felt fully present. Steven folded his hands on the table, his expression unreadable. This wasn't about fame. This wasn't about money. This was about observing the world without announcing who he was. Because when people don't know your name, they reveal their own. And what he was witnessing now would soon lead to a decision no one in that restaurant could have predicted. Backhand index pointing right. Have you ever watched someone's quiet actions and realized they were far more powerful than loud words? The restaurant grew louder as the night went on. Plates clattered. Glasses chimed. Conversations overlapped into a steady hum. But at their table, everything felt slower. Monica remained kneeling beside Steven's daughter, helping her carefully cut another piece of chicken. "You're doing great," she said softly. "Just a little to the left." Steven noticed the difference immediately. Other servers rushed from table to table, forcing smiles, glancing at watches. But Monica moved with intention. She wasn't hurrying, even though the room demanded speed. That's when the manager approached. He leaned down toward Monica, his voice low but sharp. "Table 12 is waiting," he said. "You can't keep spending 10 minutes at one spot." Monica nodded respectfully. "I'll be right there." But she didn't stand up. Not yet. Instead, she finished guiding the little girl's hand to her glass. "Your water is just here," she whispered. The manager exhaled loudly and walked away. Steven saw it all. The pressure. The warning. The quiet disapproval. And then came something worse. From 2 tables behind them, a man in a suit muttered loudly enough to be heard. "She's making a whole production out of it." Another voice added, "If the kid can't see, maybe fine dining isn't the right place." Steven felt his daughter's posture stiffen. She had heard it. Blind didn't mean unaware. Her hand tightened around her fork. Monica heard it too. For a split second, something flashed across her face. Not anger, not embarrassment, but understanding. She turned toward the little girl and said warmly, "You know something? Some of the strongest people I know can't see the world the way others do. But they feel it better." The little girl smiled again. Slowly. Carefully. The moment recovered. But Steven's expression changed. He had spent a lifetime in rooms where disrespect was disguised as sophistication. He knew arrogance when he heard it. He could have stood up right then. Could have said his name. Could have silenced the whispers in seconds. But he didn't. Because this wasn't about intimidation. This was about truth. Truth revealed when no one feels observed. The manager returned once more, this time more direct. "Monica," he said louder now, "you're needed elsewhere." She stood reluctantly. "I'll check on you in just a minute," she told Steven's daughter. As she walked away, Steven noticed something. The room had judged his daughter. But it had also judged Monica. Not for being rude. Not for being lazy. For being compassionate. And that said more about the room than it did about her. Steven leaned closer to his daughter. "Are you okay?" he asked quietly. She nodded. "I like her," she said. "She talks to me like I'm normal." That sentence hit harder than the whispers. Because that was the real issue. People didn't know how to treat what they didn't understand. Some avoided it. Some mocked it. Some criticized it. Very few embraced it. Steven looked across the restaurant and saw polished suits, expensive jewelry, confident smiles. But in that entire room, only one person had shown true class. And she was the one being warned. He folded his napkin slowly. The disrespect wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. But it was clear. And what happened next would change the balance of that entire room. Backhand index pointing right. Have you ever stayed silent? Not because you were weak, but because you were watching? Dinner ended quietly. The plates were cleared. The music softened. The crowd began thinning as the night drifted toward closing time. Monica returned one last time to their table. "Would you like dessert?" she asked gently. Steven's daughter smiled. "Can you tell me what they look like?" Monica described each one carefully. The chocolate cake layered thick and smooth, the strawberry tart shining under the lights, the vanilla ice cream slowly melting like snow in spring. Steven watched his daughter laugh. It wasn't just a description. It was inclusion. When they finished, Steven stood slowly. He adjusted his jacket and placed a hand on his daughter's shoulder. "Wait here for a moment," he said softly. He walked across the restaurant, not hurried, not angry, but steady. Conversations lowered as he approached the front counter. The manager looked up, polite but distracted. "Was everything satisfactory, sir?" Steven studied his name tag. "Daniel?" he read calmly. "Yes," the manager replied. "Daniel." Steven nodded once. "I'd like a word." There was something in his tone that made Daniel straighten slightly. They stepped a few feet aside. "I noticed your waitress," Steven began. Daniel forced a smile. "Monica?" "Yes, she's usually efficient. Tonight she was A little slow. A little slow? Steven repeated. Daniel shrugged lightly. We encourage turnover. High-end dining requires rhythm. Emotional situations can delay service. Emotional situations. Steven let the phrase settle in the air. Across the room, Monica was clearing plates quickly now, trying to make up for lost time. She was helping my daughter eat, Steven said evenly. Daniel nodded. Of course. We accommodate all guests. But there are limits. Limits? Steven's expression hardened just slightly. Call her over, he said. Daniel hesitated, but obeyed. Monica approached carefully, unsure if she was about to be reprimanded. Is everything all right? She asked. Steven turned to her. What's your full name? Monica Williams, sir. How long have you worked here, Monica? 3 years. Ever been late? No. Any complaints? She shook her head. Not that I know of. Steven glanced back at Daniel. She seems valuable. Daniel cleared his throat. She's fine. Just needs to balance time better. Steven reached into his pocket slowly. The room grew quiet without fully understanding why. He placed a black card on the counter. Daniel looked down, then froze. The name on the card read, Steven Seagal. Recognition rippled through his face. His posture changed instantly. I didn't realize. I know, Steven interrupted calmly. Whispers began spreading across nearby tables. That's him. Is that really? Phones subtly lifted. Daniel swallowed. We're honored to have you here, Mr. Seagal. Steven's voice remained steady. You were ready to discipline her for helping a blind child eat. Daniel opened his mouth, then closed it. It's about efficiency, he tried again weakly. Steven turned toward the dining room. All of you, he said clearly. Conversation stopped. Eyes fixed on him. My daughter cannot see this room, he continued. But she can hear it. She can feel it. Silence deepened. And tonight, one person made sure she felt respected. He gestured toward Monica. While others questioned whether she belonged here at all. The man in the suit from earlier looked down at his plate. Steven stepped closer to Daniel. You manage a place that calls itself high-end. Daniel nodded stiffly. High-end is not chandeliers, Steven said quietly. It's character. No shouting. No dramatic gestures. Just truth. He turned back to Monica. Do you enjoy working here? She hesitated. It pays the bills. That wasn't my question. Pause. She swallowed. I like helping people. Steven nodded slowly. Good. He looked back at Daniel. I'd like to speak with the owner. Daniel's confidence drained. I can arrange that. And until then, Steven added calmly, no one reprimands her for doing the right thing. The balance in the room had shifted. Not because of fame, but because respect had finally been defended. Steven walked back to his daughter's table. She tilted her head. Dad? She asked softly. He smiled. Everything's okay. But inside that restaurant, something had changed permanently. Because for the first time that night, the people who judged in whispers were now the ones being watched. Backhand index pointing right. If you were in that room, would you have spoken up sooner, or waited for the reveal? The energy in the restaurant had shifted completely. The whispers were gone. The laughter had faded. Even the clinking of glasses felt restrained now. At the center of it all stood Steven Seagal, calm, controlled, but unmistakably firm. Daniel, the manager, had stepped aside to make a hurried phone call to the owner. His confident tone from earlier had vanished. In its place was something far more fragile. Uncertainty. Monica stood near the counter, unsure where to look. I'm sorry if I caused trouble, she said quietly. Steven turned toward her. You didn't cause trouble, he replied. You revealed it. She didn't fully understand what he meant, but she felt the weight of his words. Moments later, Daniel returned. The owner is on his way, he said stiffly. He'd like to resolve this personally. Steven nodded once. Good. He walked back to his daughter's table and sat down beside her. Are we in trouble? She asked softly. No, he said gently. Sometimes when you do the right thing, other people feel uncomfortable. She thought about that. Why? Because it reminds them they didn't. Across the room, the earlier critics avoided eye contact. The suited man who had questioned bringing a blind child into a fine dining space now stared into his untouched dessert. Monica slowly approached again. I didn't mean to ignore other tables, she said. I just know how hard it can be. Steven looked at her carefully. How do you know? She hesitated. My younger brother, she explained. He lost his vision when he was 8. Steven listened closely. My mom works 2 jobs, she continued. Medical bills are expensive. I help where I can. And this job. It covers rent, she said honestly. Barely. There was no self-pity in her voice. Just reality. Steven leaned back slightly, absorbing everything. Here was a young woman working long shifts under pressure, criticized for compassion, while carrying responsibilities far heavier than most in that room could imagine. And she never once asked for recognition. That was the bigger truth. Kindness often comes from people who know struggle, not from people who lecture about it. The restaurant doors opened. A sharply dressed man in his late 50s walked in quickly. The owner. He approached Daniel first, whispering urgently. Then he turned toward Steven. Mr. Seagal, he said respectfully. It's an honor. Steven stood to meet him. Thank you for coming. I understand there's been a misunderstanding. There hasn't, Steven replied calmly. There's been clarity. The owner glanced toward Monica. She's one of our employees, he said carefully. We maintain standards. And what are those standards? Steven asked. The owner paused. Efficiency. Professionalism. Guest satisfaction. Steven nodded slowly. My daughter was satisfied, he said. More than satisfied. The owner shifted uncomfortably. Then I don't see the issue. Steven's voice lowered, not aggressive but precise. The issue is that your management views compassion as inefficiency. Silence. That young woman helped a blind child eat with dignity, Steven continued. And she was nearly reprimanded for it. The owner looked toward Daniel, whose face had gone pale. I'll handle that internally, the owner said quickly. Steven held up a hand. That's not enough. The room was completely silent now. I fund a foundation for visually impaired children, Steven continued. We provide therapy, education, and family support. Monica's eyes widened slightly. I've been looking for someone to help oversee a new outreach center, he said calmly. Someone who understands the reality. Not from textbooks. From life. Monica stared at him. Me? Yes. The owner blinked. You're offering her another job? I'm offering her an opportunity, Steven corrected. He turned fully toward Monica. It would mean training. Leadership responsibilities. A salary 3 times what you make here. Her breath caught. But more importantly, he added, it would mean building a space where children like my daughter, and your brother, never feel like a burden. Tears filled her eyes instantly. I don't have a degree, she whispered. I didn't ask for one, Steven said. I asked for heart. The owner stepped forward awkwardly. If compensation is the issue, we can adjust her pay. This isn't about money, Steven interrupted. It's about values. Monica looked overwhelmed. My brother's treatment, she began. Covered, Steven said gently. She pressed a hand to her mouth. The entire restaurant was witnessing something far bigger than a celebrity reveal. This wasn't revenge. It wasn't humiliation. It was redirection. Steven extended his hand. What do you say? For a moment she couldn't speak. Then she nodded through tears. Yes. And in that quiet, powerful second, the balance of worth in that room flipped completely. The waitress once criticized for taking too much time was now the most valuable person there. Backhand index pointing right. Should kindness be seen as weakness or as leadership? The restaurant no longer felt like a restaurant. It felt like a courtroom. Not because anyone was shouting. Not because there was chaos. But because truth had just been placed on the table, and no one could ignore it. Monica still stood in front of Steven Seagal, her eyes red, her hands trembling slightly. 3 times her salary. Medical support for her brother. Leadership at a foundation helping blind children. It sounded unreal. Across the room, Daniel watched with a mixture of disbelief and regret. Only an hour earlier, he had nearly written her up for delayed service. Now she was being offered a position that outranked anything he could provide. Steven noticed his expression. Daniel, he said calmly. The manager straightened instantly. Yes, sir. Do you know why this is happening? Daniel swallowed. Because she helped your daughter. Steven shook his head slightly. No. He paused long enough for the entire room to lean into the silence. It's happening because she did the right thing when it cost her something. The words landed heavily. Compassion under pressure reveals character. Monica had risked criticism. Risked reputation. Risked her shift performance. And she did it anyway. Steven turned toward the restaurant owner. You run a beautiful establishment, he said evenly. But tonight exposed something. The owner nodded cautiously. Your policies reward speed, Steven continued. But they discourage humanity. That's not our intention, the owner replied. It doesn't have to be, Steven said quietly. Impact matters more than intention. A few guests lowered their eyes, because they knew he wasn't just talking to management. He was talking to everyone who had whispered, everyone who had judged, everyone who had stayed silent. Steven walked slowly back to his daughter's table and helped her stand. She reached for his hand. Are we leaving? She asked. In a minute, he replied. He turned back to Monica. If you accept this position, he said, you'll start next week. We'll arrange everything, training, housing assistance if needed, and your brother's evaluation. Monica's voice trembled. Why me? The room waited for his answer. Steven looked at his daughter. Because my child cannot see the world, he said softly. And tonight you made sure the world saw her. Silence. Not uncomfortable. Reverent. The owner cleared his throat. We would like to apologize, he said quickly. And perhaps discuss a partnership with your foundation. Steven nodded politely. That's possible. Then his expression grew firmer. But there's one condition. Daniel stiffened again. Steven's voice remained calm, but unmovable. Your staff training changes. Effective immediately. The owner blinked. Changes how? Every employee learns how to assist guests with disabilities properly. With dignity. Without impatience. He gestured gently toward the dining area. No one in this room should ever question whether someone belongs here. The owner hesitated only a moment. We can implement that. Good. Steven's gaze moved briefly across the guests who had whispered earlier. And perhaps, he added, a reminder that empathy doesn't slow business. He paused. It strengthens it. Daniel stepped forward nervously. I misjudged the situation, he admitted quietly. Steven studied him. You misjudged a person. Daniel lowered his head. Steven didn't humiliate him. Didn't threaten him. Instead, he said something far more powerful. Learn from it. Because real correction isn't destruction. It's growth. He turned back to Monica. Are you ready? Tears slipped down her cheeks, but this time they weren't from pressure. They were from possibility. Yes, she said. Steven extended his hand once more and she shook it. The handshake wasn't flashy. No cameras. No applause. Just a quiet agreement built on respect. As they prepared to leave, his daughter tugged gently at Monica's sleeve. Will you still tell me what things look like? She asked. Monica knelt down again, the same way she had at the beginning. Every time you want, she promised. Steven watched that moment carefully. Because this decision wasn't about power. It wasn't about proving a point. It was about this. When you see someone protecting dignity under pressure, you don't ignore it. You elevate it. They walked toward the exit together. And for the first time that night, no one whispered. They simply watched. Not a celebrity leaving a restaurant, but a leader recognizing another one. 3 months later, the ribbon outside the new outreach center fluttered gently in the wind. It wasn't a massive building. It wasn't flashy. There were no red carpets. But inside, something powerful was happening. Children with visual impairments were learning how to navigate rooms independently. Parents were attending workshops. Volunteers were being trained not just in assistance, but in dignity. At the center of it all stood Monica. Confident. Focused. Composed. The same young woman who once worried about being reprimanded for spending too much time helping a blind child eat. Now she was leading orientation sessions. Her brother sat in the front row during one of the early programs, receiving advanced support he had once only dreamed of. And watching from the back of the room quietly was Steven Seagal. He didn't interrupt. He didn't introduce himself as the founder. He simply observed. Just like he had in the restaurant. Monica spoke clearly to a group of new staff members. Assistance isn't about doing things for someone, she said. It's about giving them the tools to do it themselves. She demonstrated how to guide a child's hand gently to locate objects. How to describe environments without pity. How to speak directly to the child, not just the parent. Steven watched his daughter sitting at a nearby table, smiling as Monica described a painting hanging on the wall. It's full of bright yellows and deep blues, Monica explained. The yellow feels warm, like sunlight on your face. His daughter tilted her head slightly, imagining it. And that smile again, the real one, appeared. That was when Steven knew the decision had been right. Not because it made headlines. Not because it went viral. But because it created impact. Meanwhile, back at the restaurant, changes had taken place too. The owner had implemented disability awareness training for all staff. Menus were redesigned with accessible formats. Managers were retrained to prioritize inclusion alongside efficiency. Daniel, the manager, had attended the first training session personally. He had even reached out privately to Monica weeks earlier. "I didn't see clearly that night," he admitted in his message. "Thank you for teaching me something I should have known." Growth. Not humiliation. Not revenge. Just awareness. And that was the true ripple effect. Steven believed something simple. Power is tested not when people recognize you, but when they don't. That night in the restaurant, no one treated him differently at first. But someone treated his daughter with extraordinary care. And that revealed everything. One quiet act of compassion had changed a career, funded medical support, created a center for blind children, reformed a business policy, educated an entire staff, all because someone refused to rush kindness. One afternoon, as the center wrapped up for the day, Steven's daughter sat beside him. "Dad?" she asked softly. "Yes." "Do you think people feel different when they can't see?" He thought carefully before answering. "Sometimes," he said. "But the real difference isn't in their eyes." "Where is it?" "In how others treat them." She nodded slowly. "Monica treats me like I'm strong." "You are strong," he replied. "And so is she." Across the room, Monica was helping a young boy learn how to count steps between chairs. Patient. Encouraging. Present. The same presence she had shown in that restaurant. The only difference now? It was being supported instead of criticized. Steven stepped outside the center later that evening. The sun was setting, painting the sky in colors his daughter would never physically see. But she didn't need to, because someone would describe them to her. With warmth. With detail. With respect. That's what this was really about. Not charity. Not fame. Not dramatic gestures. But recognition. Recognition that leadership can exist in unexpected places. Recognition that kindness is not weakness. Recognition that sometimes, the person quietly serving others is the one most qualified to lead. Before leaving, Steven looked back at the building once more. A simple sign above the entrance read, "Vision beyond sight." He smiled slightly. Because vision isn't always about eyes. Sometimes it's about awareness. Sometimes it's about courage. And sometimes, it's about noticing the person who kneels down when everyone else walks past. Monica's life changed that night. But so did everyone else's, including his. Because even a man known worldwide can still learn something powerful from a waitress. And that lesson was simple. True strength isn't loud. It doesn't demand applause. It shows up quietly. In patience. In dignity. In moments when no one thinks it matters. And when you see it, you don't ignore it. You elevate it.